Alright, final June 2012 album to talk about in 10 years later. Finally, I can get back in front of schedule. Oh, what's that? There are 5 albums that maybe I will talk about in 10 years later in July? Thank you, Health, for throwing me off once again. Either way, welcome back to 10 Years Later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And as you can tell from the title, today we're going to be talking about the 2012 Linkin Park album, Living Things. This was the 5th studio album from the famed alt-rock and nu metal band Linkin Park, a band that's one of my personal favorites, and the follow-up to their 2010 album, A Thousand Suns. I checked out that album for 10 years later 2 years ago, and I found myself really enjoying it. Even as it experimented with a more electronic rock direction, I found it to be a pretty natural evolution that still contained a lot of what I've come to enjoy out of the band. Now, with this album, the group continued further into that sound, but decided to get experimental in a totally different way by using all caps in their titles. Wild Boys. Of course, I kid. Everyone does all caps these days. That's far from the strangest thing the group's done. I mean, Mike Shinoda's an NFT bro now. All caps is nothing. All lowercase would have been a lot more wild and ballsy. Either way, after working with the group on their last 2 albums, Rick Rubin came in to help with production, and out came a 12-track, 37-minute project. Having enjoyed the group's last album a lot, I was excited to see what this would come through with. And I have to say I had a really good time with it, more than I honestly expected. Because much like many of the group's final albums, this was a polarizing record because of how it changed the group's sound and felt totally different from what Linkin Park had ever done before. I see why others wouldn't like that, but honestly I think that's why I dug it. I think it felt like a natural evolution of the group's sound, and I think it managed to nicely maintain a lot of what made the band so compelling. Maybe it could also be that I just like to hear Chester Bennington's voice again, but this album brought me a lot of what I like about Linkin Park in one nice, concise, quick little package. Lost in the Echo kicks off the record, and from the jump I see why some fans were a bit turned off by this track, given that it's a lot more electronic than their other stuff. Honestly though, I don't mind it. I think there's enough of their typical metal sound to make this direction feel natural for them. Toss in an incredibly memorable hook from Chester and Mike's typical emotion shining through on the verse, and we've got a strong album starter. Same thing goes for tracks like In My Remains as well. I see why fans might not be as into it with its brighter sound and all, but I think it mixes the throbbing metal sound with some electronic influences to create a song that's got plenty of emotion to it, aided nicely by Chester's beautiful vocal performance. Burn It Down even feels like it does away with some of the metal sounds, but it's still got that trademark pounce and hard-hitting tone that satisfies, even if it definitely feels like it goes in a far more radio-friendly direction than some of Linkin Park's previous work. The electronic sound is still incredibly effective, making this a reboot that still carries the spirit of the band's sound. I'll Be Gone has this style as if the group's metal sound was mixed with some old-school video games. Chester gives a performance that I'd hesitate to call understated, but it does feel a bit lighter and less screamy, with emotional lyrics that, as you might expect, take on a new meaning after Chester's tragic passing. It's smooth but emphatic, both faithful to the band and moving nicely in the new direction. Castle of Glass is probably the album's most famous song, and this one almost has the vibe of something like Easier to Run or In the End, but stripped down to be a bit lighter and brighter than the group's previous work. Even on a smaller scale, it's another compelling song that brings forth the group's sound, but in a way that feels very accessible for new audiences. And even though Victimize is only about 2 minutes, Linkin Park does far more than most would on a song this short. This is a hard, no-frills track with massive drums, screeching guitars, hard flows from Mike, and a scream Chester chorus that just easily gets stuck in your head. I wasn't sure if this would have enough to be interesting, but yeah, it really pulls it off. But if you're looking for a song that's really emblematic of the album's change in sonic direction, look no further than Roads Untraveled. Instrumentally, this is a piano-driven song with heavy bell implementation. There's not a whole lot to it. I'd argue that Victimize has more to that, despite being half of this song's length. But yeah, as basic as the chorus is, I fell for it. It's extremely memorable, and I think Mike and Chester do a great job selling this song convincingly. Not every song really nails that move into the electronic direction though. Lies, Greed, Misery still does mix the metal sounds with electronic styles, but this one is killed for me by the chorus. It's not that it doesn't have potential or anything, but it's rather that the auto-tune filters on Chester's voice become unbelievably grating almost as soon as they start. Even the screamed version of the chorus on the outro, while a bit overblown, was better for me than the auto-tune version. Skin to Bone is a darker song that digs very deep into the industrial sound. sound. I think Chester and Mike still handle it well, though I will say it could have used a better chorus. It just kind of dulls out a little faster than I thought it would, and given that the song is pretty minimal and repetitive in terms of its lyrical content, it just doesn't give a whole lot to chew over. And while I like the continued industrial sound on Until It Breaks, I do think Mike Shinoda's lyricism doesn't really grab me as much as some of his better songs. His flows are not bad, especially on that final verse, and some of the singing from Chester and Brad is nice, but yeah, this doesn't do much for me, even though it's not a particularly bad song. Tinfoil is also just a 1-minute instrumental interlude that doesn't do much for me. It's cool, it's chilly, it's kind of haunting, but once again, it does a little more than serve as a transition into the closing track, Powerless. This is a Chester-led ballad that I know he's done several times before on other albums. Even being more ballady, though, doesn't stop it from still having a slightly bigger sound to it. Thankfully, Chester's slightly more stripped-back vocal performance makes this an extremely nice track. It's far from the best ballad I've heard out of Linkin Park. I could probably name at least 3 that I'd put above this, but it's still a solid finisher to the album. Overall, despite a lot of the mixed reception, I really enjoyed my time with Linkin Park's 2012 record a decade later. I do see how some of the electronic sounds may have been a bit of a turn-off for some fans, but I don't think it sounded like selling out. Trust me, literally my last video in this series was about a band that sold out with the electronic sound. This doesn't come anywhere near that in my opinion. Rather, I think this album took the electronic sound and managed to use it to nicely evolve the group's sound without losing the essence of what made the band great in the first place. Even in the new direction, the group still leaves hints that its old DNA is ever present, and the vocal chemistry between Chester Bennington and Mike Shinoda keeps this going strong throughout. While I'm glad the album doesn't go on too long or overstay its welcome, I do think that the short length can work against it a tiny bit because there are some tracks that slow the pace down. Otherwise though, this is a record I can't complain too much about. I like what it was going for and how it mixed a new sound with the group's classic DNA to make something extremely solid. Back in 2012, I went through a period where I was really getting back into Linkin Park, so I think I would have been cool with this. Listening to it now, I think it's a good album whose change of sound doesn't work to its detriment. If I had to put it on my scale, I'd probably give it a great rating. Oh yeah, I don't think I've mentioned that in a 10 Years Later video yet. If you've been watching my shorter new album reviews that I do in the TikTok style, you may notice I've added the great rating to my usual scale. Sometimes when listening to albums, I found that the gap between good and excellent was a little too big. It's not uncommon to listen to an album and find it better than good, but not good enough to be excellent. Thus, I thought I'd add great to my scale as a result. Maybe one day I'll do a video where I look at some albums that I've reviewed or talked about in this series that would get great ratings. As it is, this is a great album, and even with the difference in sound, I think it plays well enough to Linkin Park's strengths to be an enjoyable project. But that's just my opinion on the album. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it back in 2012? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it back then, hate it back then? Do you still love it now? Do you still hate it now? Are you just completely indifferent toward it? Whatever your thoughts and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have 5 potential 10 Years Later videos that I'm going to be doing in July. There are 5 albums that I want to listen to from July of 2012 that I may do videos on. Again, if I cancel a video or listen to an album and don't have enough to say about it, I don't want it to be something that I was like, oh, in this video I'm going to be talking about blah blah blah. I don't want to end a video saying this is going to be my next one and then it's not my next one. So for now, I'm not going to tell you what the next episode is on. Just know that there are 5 potential albums that I'm going to be listening to from July of 2012 that could get videos. And as always, hey, if you want to guess what the next one is, you can leave it down in the comments below and I'll maybe let you know if you're right, but I may not. So that's where the guessing part comes in. Either way, stay tuned for those new videos, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.